The Baltics in 1444. A very peaceful, loving place. Just kidding. If you've ever played EU4, this is one of the more eventful places at the start of the game, with lots of neighbouring countries hating each other. We, however, want to particularly focus on the Teutonic Knights. When you choose a nation at the start of the game, for me, there's always this curiosity about some of the more obscure nations like the Teutonic Knights. How on earth did this holy order get here, and why is it even here? What are its relations with the neighbouring countries around, like the Livonian Order and Lithuania? Finally, I'm always curious about what it was exactly like to live in this sort of holy order. Was it fun? Was it boring? In EU4, the Teutonic Knights have always been quite a good nation to play as, although there probably needs some sort of update within this region to make it more fun. I've seen a lot of comments mentioning this, so maybe Paradox will make a DLC at some stage. Anyway, let's get into the video about the Teutonic Knights. Also, we're trying to get to 75,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you like this sort of content, why not subscribe? We begin by describing the origins of the Teutonic states, which brings us back to the 12th century. The order emerged from a field hospital founded by merchants of Lübeck and Bremen. This was in the camp of Akemies in 1190, where the order tended to the wounded and sick, since disease fell upon the citizens during the siege. Eventually, the Teutonic Knights became a military order in 1198. This was quite a different beginning to other holy orders in the region. The Teutonic Knights' mission was to hold Jerusalem and defend the Holy Land from Muslim attack. Although initially the order fought within the Holy Land, they were eventually pushed out, and the Holy Order didn't particularly make a name for themselves during this time. As time went by, the order shifted their focus from the Holy Land to Eastern Europe, which of course would greatly affect their history. The first time they managed to gain significance was due to Frederick II, who was Holy Roman Emperor in the early 13th century. He wanted them to be his own personal bodyguards, and had a very close relationship with the 4th Grand Master, Hermann von Salza. This close relationship allowed the Teutonic Knights to gain power and territory. The Grand Master became a messenger between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope, so you can imagine the amount of power this gave him as an individual. The Teutonic Knights were also invited to Hungary to defend against the Cumans. They built large castles in the region and ignored the Hungarian nobles' claim to the territories. Therefore, they were eventually pushed out in 1225 by the Hungarian king Andrew, as they were not popular with the Hungarian people, and the Hungarian king did not take kindly to the order wanting to establish their own state. The main reason why the Teutonic Knights is in the Baltics in EU4 is explained next, however. In 1226, Conrad I of Mazerovia was unable to have any power over the heathen Prussians. He therefore turned to the Teutonic Knights for help. Hermann managed to gain the Golden Bull of Rimini, which bestowed on the order immense privilege for the possession of Prussia, and allowed them to justifiably take Prussia for themselves. After gaining a claim on Kumaland in 1230, the Teutonic Knights started their first crusade into Prussia. The order began to commit small raids against the local pagan natives. Hermann initially sent 7 knights and 1,000 squires. This expedition then began to build a castle on the Vistula River, and continued to gain reinforcements over the years. Despite the very limited resources, the Teutonic Knights managed to gain a large amount of territory through a combination of alliances, fortifications, and war. The Teutonic Knights' fortification strategy gave them a large amount of success, and they had conquered most of Prussia by 1240. It's important to realise that the order forbid the knights from talking to women, and therefore they couldn't have any children, so they had to gain people externally, and they provided big incentives for Germans to resettle in the Teutonic Order land. It was, however, not complete plain sailing for the knights, and the native Prussians would rise up multiple times. One key advantage for the Teutonic Knights was, in fact, that the Prussians had grown familiar to fighting in open field, and struggled to capture any of the Teutonic Knights' fortifications. The Prussians also were very fractured, and didn't have a common strategy when fighting the knights. Eventually, these Prussian tribes fell one by one throughout the 13th century. After the Great Prussian Uprising, between 1260 and 1274, the resistance to the Teutonic Order lacked any significant danger, and eventually the Prussians were subject to Germanization and assimilated into the Teutonic Order. The culture of the pagan Prussians were therefore sadly wiped out. So now we have an understanding of how they managed to control the territories within the Baltics. What happened to them leading up to the start date of EU4? During the beginning of the 14th century, the Teutonic Order claimed Danzig and eventually captured it. With the growing power of the Order, both Poland and Lithuania decided to ally, once they saw the significant threat that the Order was to both these nations. The Teutonic Order and Poland would have an open war throughout the early part of the 14th century, until the Treaty of Calice was signed in 1343. This marked a new period for the Teutonic Knights, just 100 years before the start date of EU4. And the poor relations we see between the Holy Order and Poland in-game originated from this event. Throughout the 15th century, the Knights traded significantly with the Hanseatic League, even creating its own fleet by the end. The pinnacle of the Teutonic Knights occurred at the end of the 14th century, with them at the height of their power. The decline of the Holy Order therefore occurred in the 15th century. As time went on, many things began to develop within the region. Firstly, the townsfolk did not enjoy the harshness of the Teutonic Knights, with many strict rules being forced upon them and significant taxes. The Teutonic Knights also lost the connection to the land of Prussia, since the Grand Masters were not hereditary and had to be imported externally from Germany, leading to individuals who did not quite understand the region they were controlling. One of the final points for the decline of the Teutonic Knights is that education for the Grand Masters dwindled, with a lot of them not being able to read or write, and the development and innovation of the Knights stopped. All these factors would play a significant part in their decline, but their next event gave them a big hit, which was at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. This battle was one of the biggest in medieval Europe, and it was a crucially important victory for Poland and the Lithuanians, since it marked the end of the expansion along the southern eastern coast of the Baltic Sea. Although peace would be signed after the battle, the Teutonic Knights and Poland would fight again in the 1430s, leading to the Knights declining even further. Just before the start date of EU4 in 1440, the Hanseatic cities of Danzig and other Prussian cities founded the Prussian Confederation so that they could free themselves of the overlordship of the Teutonic Knights. It therefore is quite obvious that when EU4 begins, the Holy Order is in significant decline. And I suppose it's quite obvious in-game, because I always see Poland wiping out the Teutonic Knights. So what exactly happens after the start date of EU4? In 1454, a significant war between the Prussian Confederation occurred against the Teutonic Knights for 13 long years. This was another blow to the Holy Order, and eventually, just below 100 years after the start date of EU4, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights in 1525 accepted Poland as their overlord, and the Holy Order was therefore dissolved. I hope this gives you some context to this EU4 nation, and that you enjoyed the video. Are you, however, able to change the fate of the Teutonic Knights, and instead claim Poland as your own? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.